So today we're going to start looking at these future mysteries and asking the question, can we cultivate a moral technology? And I want to start with a verse, and many of you are familiar with this one. We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards us out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to all that may come, and we must think only that whatever comes is given to us by a world direction full of wisdom. This is what we have to learn in our times, to live out of pure trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Surely nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. Let us properly discipline our will, and let us seek the inner awakening every morning and every evening. Just as a side note, this is attributed to Rudolf Steiner. I actually don't know the name of the person who was at the lecture from whence this comes, but Steiner did not actually say these exact words.
But it's in English.
And it's in English too, right? The slide I'm showing right now.
Wait. In other words, he did not say those exact words, but the person who transcribed this or who has brought
Made a verse out of it.
Made
yeah.
a verse out of his inspirations from that lecture?
Yes. I mean, they're almost, if you find the lecture, you'll find that those expressions are in the lecture, but Steiner didn't give it as a verse. And so it's a little bit of a condensed.
It's kind of extrapolated out, condensed, kind of a condensed,
Correct.
edited version of it.
Right. The slide I'm showing now is my list of books having to do with the subject of technology that Rudolf Steiner talked about in lectures. So these are all lectures, and things like the Temple Legend, the Reappearance of Christ in the Etheric, which actually isn't a lecture series that Rudolf Steiner gave by that title, but one that was collection of lectures put together later. The Etherization of the Blood is in that, for example, and that was in October of 1911. And these go on, Balance in the World and Man, the Karma Vocation, the Karma of Materialism, the Fall of the Spirits of Darkness, the Secret Brotherhoods, the Challenge of the Times, the Influences of Lucifer and Ahriman, Materialism, the Task of Anthroposophy. And this is a short list. The amount of other lectures and book series would triple this size easily. But the thing I wanted you to notice is, what season are these? November, October, November, April through June on that one, October. You know, it's quite interesting how he gave these lectures having to do with technology, and where he mentions machine in particular in the lectures normally take place in this Michaelmas season, this October-November timeframe. Now, many anthroposophists use the term etheric technology, and so this slide tries to address that a little bit, because when Steiner used it, he was referring to Atlantean times. And if you recall from last night, in Atlantean times, our consciousness was operative in our etheric body. What was happening in the physical body was much more of a dreamlike consciousness, a picture consciousness at best. And so they were quite aware of dealing with things in the etheric, for which we today are unconscious. We don't really, we're developing there. Let's put it that way. So, and what they were able to do was to put together what could be called machines, and the driving force of those was the germinating power of seeds that was used. And according to a guy named Scott Elliott, who was a contemporary of Steiner's, this prana or life force was used to propel, and his word was airships. But remember, in this time, the atmosphere was dense. It was full of vapor, and we can't even really compare anything that we experience today to what existed in Atlantean times. But the air would have been heavy, if you could even call it air. It was a mixture of water and what we call air today. And that's also important when we get later on in this talk today. So fundamental to this idea of the mechanical occultism being developed in America comes from the book The Challenge of the Times, where Steiner mentions 3 occultisms, one to be developed in the East, one in the middle sections, which would include Europe, and then in the West, which he would define as England and America. Now, those 3 occultisms are eugenic, hygienic, and mechanical. And sometimes the word material occultism is used. And in this, Steiner talks about harmonic oscillations emanating from human beings, and that using these laws, which I think are only barely touched upon today, of resonances and he calls that curve of oscillations, that those emanations will be able to drive machines. Now, that's not the only thing he says. So we have this driving of machines. We will also see that he also describes a moral filter to electronic and magnetic driven machines. So in this lecture 3 of the Challenge of the Times, he goes on to mention America and as where this mechanical occultism should be developed. And many people have wondered, well, gee, America must be some place of evil. Look at what it's doing in the world today. And you can find all sorts of writings, often by anthroposophists, about how America is sort of ruining the world and taking it down. That's one perspective you can take. I like to take a different one that, in a way like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, America, as it was in the spiritual world, as a being of the archangel level, and some people have said maybe a little bit not as advanced as the other archangels, or maybe the halfling like Frodo of the archangels volunteered to do this job, to allow for Ahriman to incarnate here. And what a service to humanity that is, to allow yourself to be the place where Ahriman is allowed to incarnate. But there's a lot in this history which would be important, knowing about the indigenous people and how they relate to these Atlantean times, and then to the Mexican mysteries. And in this book, what's it called? I'm sorry. Well, if you just look for the Mexican mysteries on Rudolf Steiner Archive, you'll find these lectures. He refers to how in this Mayan area, and this would be BC times, for the first 300 years, in a sense, before BC, was the rise of black magicians, very high initiates. And in this practice, they would need to commit a murder in order to be allowed into this school of initiation, where the high initiates would take a person who has been deemed to be the sacrifice and strap them up on the top of these temples on this so-called altar so that their belly area was exposed. They would be held back and strapped like this, and then with one sort of knife swoop, they would cut out their stomach. And thereby they were able to, through this black magic, assess a lot of power through that. And there is an individual who, he says, incarnates around the year 1 AD there, who is, according to the legends, and it's, I can't pronounce the name, it's like Hutzliputz-Atol or something like this. It said he is born of a virgin, and he only lives till he's 33, and before he dies, he confronts this high black magic initiate and overcomes him. And it said he crucifies him upside down, according to some anthroposophists who heard Steiner's lectures here, but it doesn't say that in Steiner's lectures. But
Crucifies who? Upside down?
so he,
The
so
black magician.
the
is
black
crucified
magician,
upside down.
right,
By this Christ-type individual.
right.
Or maybe
So
by-
he's crucified upside down at the same time that the mystery of Golgotha is taking place in Palestine. That's a fascinating aspect of cosmic balance going on, and something which isn't taken up again by Steiner. It's the only place I know of where this is taken up. And even in that, Steiner is mentioning that there have been things that could not have been said, including this mechanical occultism that could not have been said until his time. And so he's still holding lots back. And last night we heard about this future eugenics with the Slavic people. And one of the things I didn't mention is that it is people from this 6th post-Atlantean cultural age who will survive the war of all against all in the 7th. So 2,000 years later, it will be remnants from the 6th one that will survive and take us to the 6th great epoch. Okay, so here in America, we have been a land of immigrants, and we were just talking about what's happening here in America to stop that today. But we are a land of immigrants, and many people bemoan what we did to the indigenous peoples. It's interesting, I have to find this again, but I know in one of the lectures I was reading, but I haven't been able to find it again, Steiner mentioned that it is in the West, and in America in particular, where spiritual movements come in their old age to die.
Spiritual movements come in their
Old age come to die.
America is the place.
America's the place.
So
So that may have to do with the indigenous peoples and the spiritual, philosophies and so on that they were carrying. I don't think what we get from indigenous peoples today is much more than a caricature of what it used to be of those indigenous religions of the past. I think European philosophies and tortures and conversions and all that diluted that to a great extent. Anyway, the idea of immigrants helps to further this Michaelic gesture of cosmopolitanism. Michael is very opposed to nationalism, of any kind. And we need to learn from Michael how to feel a oneness with all members of humanity. So America has that capability. So I see America in a very different light than many of my colleagues in Europe and elsewhere. But so I mentioned a few things last night about looking at Greek mythology. We don't have enough time, but I just want to point it out again. This Hephaestus, or Hephaestus, some people pronounce it that way, is what in Greek is Vulcan in Latin. And we heard about the Vulcan spiritual beings coming, to our rescue right now. It's useful to look at who this Hephaestus was and what relationship he had to the gods. It's of those times, of the Zeusian gods. So Hephaestus is the son of Zeus and Hera in most of the traditions. I mean, some people have tried to say maybe he was the son of something else. Hera, when she sees this malformed foot, is so disgusted, she throws him off of Olympus. And so he grows up on the earth. It's an interesting parallel to this homeless gods called the Vulcans, who are expelled from the sun and have to live in a sort of nondescript sphere between the moon sphere and the esoteric Mercury sphere. So you say in the geocentric model, there's around the Earth a moon sphere, and then the next sphere is the Mercury sphere. And the planet we call Venus today, esoterically, is Mercury, and the names got switched when we went from geocentric to heliocentric. Another important part of technology's role in evolution is this letter, the last letter Steiner wrote. So while he's on his deathbed, he's writing letters to the members. And in a sense, these letters are a recapitulation of his lectures, of his books, of what anthroposophy is. And fundamentally in it, he describes the role of Michael, the role of the Christ, and then he goes into other things. And the last letter is this letter where he says, we are at a critical point in this evolution. And the critical point is that we have embraced materialism in order to develop freedom. And we've done a fantastic job of that. And all our sciences have done an amazing job, but they're all based on this materialistic outlook. And so with what's coming, we are in danger of sliding down into the abyss between physical existence and the spiritual world. And that danger is aided by these, what he calls fallen ethers. So it's aided by electricity and magnetism and what he said is a third force, which he hopes humanity won't find until our moral character is strong enough. Some people say, was that the nuclear force? And he said that we have to rise into supernature, and that first awakening will be in this etheric world, in an equal amount that we go down into these fallen ethers. And that will keep us in balance and keep us healthy. If we go in one direction or the other too strongly, unhealthy things will come to us, new unhealthy things that we don't even know about yet. So Keely in his mystery plays, the character is Strader. If I live in Boston, it's Strata. But so we'll look at Keely, and then Paul Emerson has done an amazing amount of work and coined this term moral technology. And his books, From Gandhi Shapur to Silicon Valley, comes in 3 volumes. Each of them are about 700 pages. And then he's got a much smaller book, Machines and the Human Spirit. And I do recommend these, but I recommend, having a large display of salt nearby, because I don't want you to end up, like many do, totally terrified from what they've read. So I'm going to read now the call to action that Steiner gave to us for our times. It goes like this. The will is there to harness human energy to mechanical energy. These things should not be treated by fighting against them. That is a completely false view. These things will not fail to appear. They will come. What we are concerned with is whether, in the course of world history, they are entrusted to people who are familiar in a selfless way with the great aims of earthly evolution and who structure these things for the health of human beings, or whether they are enacted by groups of human beings who exploit these things in an egotistical or in a group egotistical sense. This is what matters. Now, some people can read that. I'm not done yet, but some people can read that and say, oh, this sounds like elitism. Elitism by spiritual people to say we get to control things because we're better than thou. And it's not saying that, but it is saying that these things are very important, and if we just leave them to what is happening in American economic setting today, which means that before you bring something to market, you've got to make the business case, the business plan, you've got to show so much profitability and these sorts of things. Is that playing into this egotistical, group egotistical with my company and its profitability sense? It's not exactly clear, but it does seem that's true. But we'll see later that there's also the question of these secret brotherhoods. So he goes on. It is not a question of the what in this case. The what is sure to come. It is a question of the how one tackles these situations and what is to come. The what lies simply in the meaning of earthly evolution. The welding together of the human nature and the mechanical nature will be a problem of great significance for the remainder of earthly evolution.
And the welding together is the what? What is the what? What can we?
So what is yes, this welding together. He'd already begun earlier talking about this is what will happen.
Yeah.
And so he's
of human energy to mechanical energy.
right. And other translators have just used the word welding together of the human with the machine.
Okay.
This translator used human nature with mechanical nature.
Okay.
And that is from the Reappearance of Christ in the Etheric, the lecture called Individual Spirit Beings and the Undivided Foundation of the World, and that came in 3 parts, and that was part 3 of that. So the what, he goes on to call it the iron necessity.
Okay.
Where human freedom exists is in the how and the by whom.
Can't have one without the other.
Right. So I wanted to mention Tech, which was founded just last June 12th with about 10 members out in Seattle, and several members were on video conferencing from Pittsburgh and other places. And it's grown since then. We, on Monday nights, have 2 different study groups. So there's about 35 people going through these study groups. They come all the way from Europe to the Philippines, which makes the time zone differences very difficult to maintain. So we also have a Facebook group called Mystech. It's a secret Facebook group, and oops, I'm on camera now, I've revealed it. And there's another one which is a public one called Anthroposophy and Mechanical Occultism. And then there's a website called mystech.co.
Why secret?
Because the people who are participating in this study group did not necessarily want their colleagues from work and so on to know that they're doing this.
Okay.
Okay? A lot of the people work at Google. We have people working at Facebook. There's several people who are just software engineer freelancers, and so. Now, the map I'm showing is a map of the lines of deviation on the world, and the picture is obviously a flattened globe, so it's a 2-dimensional map. And so the lines of deviation from true north have quite some different curls. Down here in the lower right, just north of the Antarctic continent and just south of Tasmania and Australia is the South Pole. The North Pole we can't see, and these lines look funny, but actually you have to see them as lining up on the magnetic North Pole, but because the map has been flattened, they look like they're lines of discontinuity there.
Well, is it a true Mercator projection or not?
A true what?
Mercator projection.
I'm not sure what a Mercatic projection is.
Mercator is a method of flattening the map into a two-dimensional, but preserving the knowledge of the three-dimensional line.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's the old type of maps from like the 1950s and that you'd get in National Geographic.
What's the difference between blue, red, and green?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you that. So
Give us a reference for this.
yeah,
What is the point of the map?
I'll explain all of that. So here we see North America, over here Europe, Africa, and Asia, and you'll see blue lines, green lines, and red lines. And the green line shows where this will run directly to the magnetic North Pole, and that line will run through that to the true North Pole. So if you happen to be standing here in St. Louis, Missouri, with a compass, it is pointing not only to magnetic north, but true north. So if you just have a magnetic compass that makes no calculations, but there are ways of navigation that will use this information here to orient you differently. And as you move towards New York and so on, the deviation is very small, and the lines are rather straight, moving north and south.
Andrew, I'm sorry, but I don't really even know what the difference between true north and magnetic north is.
Okay, so around the Earth is a magnetic shield, you might say, and where the ions, which help give you, they're moving, and so they are following this magnetic field and essentially dropping in at North Pole or dropping in at South Pole, depending on whether they're positively or negatively charged.
The Earth is a magnet.
Right.
This is
Oh,
the
it has a
field
magnetic field.
of the magnetism on the surface of the Earth is what you're showing right there. But-
Right.
And
But what I'm showing here is its deviation, the magnetic field's deviation from going true north.
so green means 0.
Right, no deviation.
It's
It's
just-
right on.
Okay.
Okay?
And
And
true-
blue is to one side and red is to the other side.
It's the North
And
Pole.
true north is like you stick a stick through the sphere and one end is north and one end is south. Is that what true north is?
Right. So if you were geographically between true north and magnetic north, you were between those, and you got out a compass, just a magnetic compass, and you were going, which way is north? The compass would point south, but north is still farther north.
The compass would be pointing toward the magnetic,
Right, because it's pointing towards the magnetic.
yeah.
So it would point north to your south.
Okay.
Is there a positive and a negative pole in the Earth? If the Earth is a magnet?
Yes, yeah.
Which is positive, which is negative?
So
I don't wanna get too-
does it, I don't know if it matters, because what we call positive or negative,
Yeah.
and these have been known to flip in the past, but there's ions that are attracted towards the negative pole, and other ions towards the positive pole. But I don't
Part
remember.
of the map just to show their deviation, recognizing there's a true north and magnetic north, there could be deviations depending where you are on the planets. You had a compass.
I'm not going to show this slide again.
Just let him finish.
So why did I put this up? Well, the reason why is Steiner pointed to this and said, in America, where these lines are nice and straight versus here in Europe where the lines are curved, and he goes, you can even follow these and they look like a snake, that here in America, because of these, the magnetic forces are totally different, not totally different, sorry, much stronger here than elsewhere in the world. Right? And those magnetic forces, as they work, the field of magnetism as a fallen ether, he calls the field that is where Ahriman works most powerfully.
Also Siberia.
Also Siberia. As you can see, the green line coming right up through here.
You can also find geomagnetic maps that show you the strength of the field.
Yes.
in addition to the direction.
Right. So strength, so good thing I didn't bring that one up. But thanks for mentioning it. And why does he mention that? Well, we talked about the double last night that joins you at birth and leaves you just before death. And he says that Ahrimanic double is strengthened here by these straight line magnetic forces. Okay, this is a long 20-minute discussion just to tell you that one of the reasons why Mistech picked Seattle is Seattle's up here, okay? And so where Seattle is, this line isn't quite east-west, but it's at about a 45-degree angle going through Seattle.
What's the reference for this?
The value of that.
The
Is
red.
to allow for a weakening, if you will, there, of the impact of the harmonic double towards the work we're trying to achieve. So just in case that does have some effect, and this is in some respects an answer to some of the anthroposophists who have said this work shouldn't be done in America because of this influence on from the East Coast all the way to the Rockies. And then after the Rockies, it starts. Now it's interesting, Silicon Valley, in Seattle is Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they're all there. John?
I need a reference. I was spending time trying to look this thing up after you mentioned it.
I can,
I want to see it once.
map developed by NOAA, and there's a website right here called ngdc.noaa.gov. If you go to
And this is
noaa.gov,
you publish this again in your website. This is-
yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's the cover of that Facebook group.
Okay.
I mentioned anthroposophy and the mechanical occultism. It's the
Very good.
photo that's used.
Good.
And I think the reference is there as well, but,
Good.
okay. Whew. So, Mistech hopes to answer the how and the who that we saw before, that Steiner says is so important, that, yeah, so you get the point. We're doing it in America, and in particular in Seattle. And for that, we feel that we have to realize a true and inwardly moral way forward for humanity's future with technology. And in a couple slides, we're going to run out of time. So our goals immediately is merely to help steer the industry. We are putting emails into various people's inboxes. We're trying to help awaken people who are working in this field today, and in particular to build an interface that will act as a filter of impulses so that moral impulses go through, immoral impulses are stopped by this interface. Machines driven by harmonic resonances, such as the Keely machine and what Paul Emerson refers to as the moral technology, is something that is right now our pipe dream. We hope to get there one day, but we realize that we ourselves, as the researchers, are not at a place morally, inwardly, where we feel that this technology will reveal itself well to us. And we'll see more about that.
Can you talk about what the Keely machine is last night?
So I'll have a slide coming up, but yeah, what that is. So, and the other thing, as you've been hearing all along, is to help overcome this rising fear of Ahriman and Ahriman's coming incarnation in America. We're not helped by fear here. So to do that, we feel we have to help ourselves as a group of Mistech, but also others in the world to develop for this coming technology and for a healthy confrontation with Ahriman. We will not win an intellectual battle. We can only win with a healthy human being in its wholeness. So it begs a question within anthroposophy. There is a school for spiritual science, and that school has different sections associated with the different fields that humanity is engaged in. And the question is, technology, what section should it be part of? In Holland, the different sections got together and said, this belongs to all of us. And so they meet as an intersectional group working on this question of technology. In America, it's existed largely because of me, I guess, being one of the few people in the natural science section. I don't know of other sections that have tried to take up this work. And the natural science section, a little plug here, coming up on November 9th to the 12th at the Rudolf Steiner House in Ann Arbor, will be doing its annual conference, this time on astronomy, the 18 lectures of GA 323. So does this belong in a general section? Those are things we can talk about when we get, there's also the question of the culmination that supposedly happened at the turn of the century, and Stephen Usher has written about this. You can find that by doing a search for the culmination by Stephen Usher. So how do we merge man and machine? And we've seen this quote of welding together of human beings with machines great important problem for the rest of Earth evolution. That's a different translation. And Steiner says, I have often pointed out, even in public lectures, that human consciousness depends on destructive forces. It's not our building up capability when we're using our consciousness and our thinking, but we actually are, that is a destructive force. During public lectures in Basel, I twice said that in our nerve system, we are always in process of dying. These forces of death will become stronger and stronger, and we shall find that they are related to the forces of electricity and magnetism and to those at work in machines. Okay. And we saw last night that this withering of the human physical body is well underway already. And so this sense of who I am being associated with the consciousness arising out of our nerve system is aiding in this withering and this destruction of the body itself. So now facing this human mechanical in this period that we're in, the fifth Paka, we will have to solve the problem of how human moods, the motions of human moods, allow motions or harmonics or resonances of human moods allow themselves to be translated into wave motions on machines. How man must be brought into connection with what must become mechanical. I'll repeat, with what must become mechanical. The will is there to harness human energy to mechanical energy. And then again, these things should not be treated by fighting against them. That is a completely false view. And again, this is a repeat of what I had before. Sorry about that. So the question then is where do we perform this welding that Steiner is referring to? And from last night, I hope you see that it seems obvious to us, and I'll show some other things, that welding will take place between the etheric body, the life body, and the physical body. Okay, and something the curvature of the screen makes a very interesting line from my place here. What I'm showing here in this slide, Ken, is something you just heard in the temple legend. It shows the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. And next to those, physical, etheric, astral, human, and divine. And with a you are here in the upper right corner of that mineral kingdom. And what Steiner has mentioned in this lecture is that all of these are moving up in the time we're in. So when our lowest member becomes our etheric, it will actually be a kind of moving up, if you will, of our physical, even though as we are sort of losing the physicality. So I ask you just to hold it as a picture. I know it doesn't quite make sense in a material way because all of these bodies will at that point not be material. Okay? But this all moves up. This happened on Old Moon. Steiner called it a half step up towards that completion. So what else does he say about the physical body? It will be as if the denser part in this future time, in this sixth millennium, it will be the denser part of man, as if the denser part of man were here below on earth, and the human being will make use of it from the outside, like an instrument. Man will no longer bear his body about and live within it, but will float above it. The body itself will have become rarefied and finer. I think I mentioned part of that last night. So I show a picture from the movie Avatar, is that kind of thing coming. But the body, the physical body as we know it, will be seen as a vehicle which you can even share with another human being for their benefit to resolve their karma. So I'm asking the question, what can you fall in love with? And remember, Hephaestus was thrown off of Olympus because he had a malformed foot. Can you fall in love with a person who has a missing finger? I think all of us would say, sure, that's not a problem for me, missing finger. What about a missing arm? And I'm showing a picture of a very beautiful woman, but she's got a robotic right arm. Would that cause you to not fall in love with her if you're another 20-something-year-old and met her? Sorry, I'm using a guy's analogy here. But or what about a leg? So you get the point, an arm or a leg? What does it take for me to say I can't love that person? What if they have a pacemaker? And you see where I'm going. What is left of a human being when we start replacing parts? And how do we feel about being able to take that person on as a partner in my life? Would you marry such a person? Or would you love them at a distance? Interesting, we've just accomplished a transplanted face. We've had, cosmetic surgery for a long time, but we actually had a face removed from a cadaver and put on a person who had horrible, I think it was damage from acids. But now, what about a person who's deceased?
I mean, the problem here is you're looking at this and describing this in terms of our current materialistic consciousness.
Correct.
This really is not human, ultimately. If we look only at the outer physical form, material form,
Right.
that which is totally mineral and incarnate, what do we got?
So that's exactly what I hoped you would all come to by this little exercise, is to see as we lose our physical bodies, we can't bemoan that. It's actually part of our spiritual evolution, our progress. And by losing it, we have to adjust. But before that happens, we have to start gaining something so that we're not lost when that happens. And so the question of loving becomes a very different question than the way we have fallen in love up to this time. So the last thing there was, can you love somebody that you only know through their avatar? Well, I have a foster kid that fell in love with somebody on the internet and has actually gone out to the state of Washington to be with him. So, here's Keely, and what Steiner said last night, we heard that he said Keely was not a fake. What Keely could do, he had some machines, and one of the things he could do was to sit down and play his violin. And the emanations from the violin, from him playing it, could set a machine in motion. Steiner and others have indicated that Keely had an unusual and way before his time moral character, so that these machines would respond only to him and not to others, which frustrated his investors tremendously, because they built a big company around this so-called free energy. There's an individual named Gopi Krishna Vijaya, Vijaya. He's out in Salt Lake City, just got his PhD 2 years ago out of the University of Houston, who studied Keely quite a bit and during his PhD work and so on. And he came to the conclusion that Keely was working with all of the ethers after warmth. Warmth is kind of a given, but he was using the light, tone, and life ethers in what he was working upon. So obviously tone when he's playing music. I don't confess I grasp all of that at this point, but so how do we get to this driving force, or what's known as by Emerson as a moral technology? So again, Keely was not deceiving because he had this driving force originating in him, and this driving force can only be moral. That is the idea of the future, a most important force with which culture must be inoculated if it is not to fall back on itself. And now we're going to get into something of the building of the temple and the Tau symbol. What is expressed in the Tau is a driving force which can only be set in motion by the power of selfless love. When Balkis asked Hiram Abiff to assemble all the workers so that she could see them, he stood up on a balcony overseeing it all and gave them the Tau sign. And that Tau sign alone, the workers knew to come and assemble.
What workers what is this picture, the larger picture? What workers are we talking about?
The workers on Solomon's temple.
On Solomon's Temple.
Discussed that yesterday.
So this organizing of the workers out of this selfless motive and expressing it through the Tau assembled these workers. So now the question is, can it assemble, not assemble, but drive essentially a machine? Can it get it operational? Okay, Steiner also talked about moving hands will get machines in factories and so on working. And I'm almost out of time here. And you know, I remember, oh geez, I had it in my mind and I lost the word. This type of photography. Curlian photography, thank you. You know, there's lots of healers out there who, and Reiki and all these other sorts of things, you know, talk about emanations from the hand. Steiner says, to a clairvoyant, the hands of a man are remarkably different in a particular respect from all his other bodily members. Luminous projections of the etheric body stream out from the fingers, sometimes glimmering faintly and sometimes flashing far into the surrounding space. The radiations from the fingers vary according to whether the man is happy or troubled, and so on. Now, another thing about this moral and the mechanical and the moral must interpenetrate each other because the mechanical is nothing without the moral. Today we stand hard on this frontier. In the future, machines will be driven not only by water and steam, but by spiritual force, by spiritual morality. And again, the power symbolized by the Tau sign and was indeed poetically symbolized by the image of the Holy Grail. Man is no longer merely dependent on what nature will freely give him to use. Remember, in the 4th century, what nature could give to mankind ended. He can shape and transform nature. He has become the master craftsman of the inanimate. In the same way, he will become the master craftsman of the living. But that happens and not until the next great epoch, and we saw the spidery beings as the first sort of playground for that. So what are these harmonic oscillations we've been talking about? Chladni resonance, we all have probably seen pictures. I'm showing one of a large plate about 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet, and a guy is pulling a bow on the side of it, and it's arranging all these filings on it into patterns. What happens if you pull that bow with an immoral intention versus a moral intention, would those patterns change? I would say, as a scientist, I would say absolutely not. That has nothing to do with it. So, where might it happen? So, we have rhythms that happen in the air, in the water, and in the earth. We don't know too much about the warmth because all we look at when we look at thermodynamics and its movements is warmth as a material thing, as vibrations of molecules. Warmth as an ether, we have no way to detect. But now, what about light, the tone ether, and the life ether that Gopi Krishna mentioned Keely was using? Are there rhythms here? Well, Steiner does say all these ethers are in fact rhythms. In fact, he goes on to say that all of these elements are in a sense, standing waves of these ethers. Now, there's boundaries, and here I'm showing puddles with drops that have fallen into the water and these concentric waves that emanate out from where the drops occur. Okay, now that's obvious, you can see that in water, but what you don't often realize is that the air here is vibrating as well. The air is moving up and down with those waves. It's being compressed when the wave comes up, and it's relaxing. Very localized, yes, but the air itself has these waves that follow the waves on the water.
So it's like a cross-section of the air. You know, like it's a cross-section of the three-dimensional phenomenon that you could say.
Right, you could say that. So the question then is, at these boundaries, because a moral force starts in the astral as an emanation from the ego and moves then through the astral into the etheric body before it becomes a willed activity of the movement of the physical body. Can we understand that at the boundary between the etheric and the physical, as we can see these emanations here being at a boundary? So the spiritual etheric shall be placed in the service of outer practical life. The emotion in a human mood will be transmitted in wave movements to machines. The emotion in a human mood between the dying forces of the nervous system and the external power of the machine. So there's something called the Schiller Files by Paul Eugen Schiller. This is now available. I got it a couple years ago from the Rudolf Steiner Library as just a manuscript. It's now been published. And in it, Dr. Pfeiffer had asked Steiner about these Keely machines, and Steiner had replied that the time was not yet ripe for the etheric forces to become operative. And the editor put in humanity. I'm not sure that's correct. To be operative in machines, perhaps, or between humanity and machines. Dr. Pfeiffer asked, when would that time come? And Steiner's answer was, when the threefold social order and Waldorf school education are realized and humanity had another moral constitution. And the question is, are we there yet? Am I barking up a tree worthlessly with Mystech? Is it too soon? Well, we shall find out, I guess. As I said, we've already started this. There's membership and so on. And one of the things we are initially trying to do is influence what's coming in just a few more years called exosuits. And I mentioned these last night. You can see a picture here of what's being developed at MIT. This wearable robotics will give you massive strengths that a normal human being will not have. And the danger is that while you're in one of these suits and you forget about it, could you do regrettable damage to property or worse to another human being? If someone said to one of the people wearing this, "What an idiot you are," and the person goes to slap them in the face, you know, and suddenly that person's head has been so concussed or maybe even knocked off that the person dies, who's at fault? Do we want that kind of capability where when you're living in the machine, you can forget about it? We talked about being in a car. How are people different? We hear about road rage of people who in normal life are quite fine individuals. But when they get behind a car, something else happens. And I know Gus was trying to keep up with me, driving through the 20-mile-an-hour zones, and Saturday morning I kept going at 35. Yeah, that speed bump was unbelievable.
That's where you find about, was it inertia and force of gravity working in the back of your car? Stuff goes flying with you.
So I'm almost at the end. We'll go into discussion, but I'm sorry I'm running over here. What I'm showing is a new technology that uses facial recognition to get to 85 to 90% correctness on the mood that a person has. So we heard earlier about moods, and Steiner saying translating those into machines. So this is one of the technologies being developed. And here's how it works in a sense. It looks at 43 different facial muscles, and there's several thousands of nuances of how these different muscles can work together to give different facial emotional revelations. And what I'm showing are the signatures of different things like sadness or fear or contempt. And they have a different signature of those muscular things. So that's one technique. At MIT, in the Computer Science Artificial Intelligence Lab, something called EQ radio has been developed. And here you see the instrument, and it's sending out something like a Wi-Fi, but it's not that frequency. And it hits the person, the individual in the room, and then those signals come back. They bounce off of anything solid, but they're modified by the movements that are going on. They're modified in a sense, not only by your breathing, but by all the vibrations of your internal organs. And so far, and they believe they can go a lot farther with this, they've been able to also reach this 85, 90% accuracy in determining a person's mood. Microsoft is following this with Project Oxford, and Apple also with Emotion. So there's a lot working on this.
You know, I have been doing a lot of this work as a reviewer.
Say it a little louder, so yeah, he's
And,
Ken Ingham here, yeah.
Yeah, the comment I'd like to make is that some of the issues that one ignores as one does this research and development are things like, why are you doing it? What are the consequences of your doing it? And 99 times out of 100, the basic reason finally boils down to, because I can. And that's the least of human motives for bringing this technology to the market or into the world. Because I can do it. What is that? That's not human.
Right.
And so much of what you're describing here is absolutely without purpose or benefit. But people don't ask that. They just say, hey, I can do it. I can get a grant. I can get fame. But even that.
Or get rich.
Or get rich. Although
Or
most scientists don't.
Right, most don't. So it's knowing what's coming, what Mistech's hope here is to help steer things so that we don't take most of humanity down into the abyss. So, that sounds pretty preposterous to say that, but whatever help can be done is helpful. We're not grandiose in our ideas. We may not succeed at all, but yeah, Cindy.
Do you look at the differentiating between emotions and feeling? Emotions being...
Well, you're asking me. That's a question more for those folks.
Right, but no, I'm asking you as Mystech, do you look at that phenomenon? Because here they're doing research about human feeling, but what about, not human emotion? And when I say emotion versus feeling, I'm saying like the perceptual awareness, like pure perception would be feeling, and emotion would be like a response or a reaction.
Right.
But what about, so what I'm thinking is, what does it look like when we have achieved calm? I would think that would be a calm feeling phenomenon, and I wonder what that looks like on all the charts, and how do we manifest that, and how do we look out for that?
Right. This is a good question, and in the realm of feelings are your antipathies and your sympathies and so on, and those are clearly different than your emotions. So we're a new organization. I don't know, I can't speak for the other members of it yet, but I thank you for bringing that up and try to carry that into the group.
Yeah, what I'm talking about, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong words, but just really quickly, just to clarify, when I'm saying feeling, and it might be the wrong word for this, but this would be a feeling beyond sympathy and antipathy. So it'd just be like that, like I'm saying, like a pure awareness, a pure perception that is beyond that is within the realm of calm, within the realm of being able to perceive without having that reaction, whether it's positive or negative.
Okay.
Yeah, just a higher level of human feeling.
Good. Yeah. I'm not sure if I covered this slide already or not. Yeah. So Isaac Newton even had a quote here: "It is not animal motion performed by the vibrations of this medium," and I put in brackets the etheric body, "excited in the brain by the power of the will." And the emotion of the human mood will be transmitted into wave movements to machines between the dying forces. So we've heard that one. So I think I better stop. The next set of slides here, which you can pull, go into breathing. And breathing is one of our oscillations that we do, and it is connected cosmically. It is if biblically, when Yahweh breathed in to Adam, he became a living being. Something was breathed in, and we talked about in the past the air being ensouled, and so yoga could develop, and that today, because of all of this being sort of densified, that ensouled location is now in what we'll call the light ether. And by light ether, Steiner means all of the sensory inputs. Okay, not just visual. And those are all coming as vibrations. So we, in a sense, inhale through our senses. As we inhale through our breath, what we exhale in our senses is also something. And between that, what we have inhaled combines with what we have been inhaling as air. And this gets into things like the philosopher's stone. When we are thinking, what is happening there? There is a mineralization process that is going on. and this grabbing hold of carbon that we then later move that out of our bodies and exhale, we have exhaled something that has had our thinking imprinted upon it. And we saw last night about these beings who will be human on Jupiter are receiving their bodily form out of our exhalations. And I'm not sure where it happens. Yeah, there's a moral impulse detectable on exhalations. And he goes into this more, and I'm sorry I won't be able to go into all of these slides, but a person's moral or immoral behavior can be seen in the steamy breath. So he talks about horses on those cold mornings when you could see their breath, and he goes to a person, and you don't even need much of a level of initiation to be able to see that.
Or you could be all steamed up.
Right, thank you for that. Yes, so language has this genius for knowing these things, and Steiner also indicated to these scientists, and it's brought up in the Schiller file, that another way to be investigating this is to look at the flame of candles. I don't know of any scientist that's been able to find much there, but John here is our local expert on fire. So when we go into discussion, you might have something to say. But I need to stop all of this. Yeah, there's a lot of quick little cartoon. I know I'd be happier as a cyborg than as a full human.
This guy's brilliant.
Dilbert and at the doctor's office. I want you to surgically embed a Bluetooth headset in my ear powered by my own body chemistry, and I'd like an interocular lenses with vision correction and streaming video over Bluetooth. And the doctor responds, happiness only comes in pill form. And boy, is that fitting for today. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I threw way too much in, but the pictures of moving on towards our Jupiter phase and so on. But let's,
Oh, you had fun.
just a few slides too many.
We can cover this in a couple of minutes.
So we looked at Mystech, a little bit of etheric and moral technologies. We tried to look at their relationship to the human being and why they're not, how they're different than that etheric technology that occurred in Atlantean times. The development of selfless love is necessary to develop this moral technology. And humanity is not only going downwards, it also has the opportunity to go upwards now. This is an expansion of humanity. So just as the angels are the spirits of twilight for us, they can descend all the way to, but not into, physicality and rise above. Humanity will be beings that will be able to descend to subnature as we also rise into supernature.